Mr. Humboldt Hippie here. The United States of America, the federal government, and the United States Treasury Department paid $5 per decapitated indigenous person's head. In the state of California, it was common and it was general practice to hunt indigenous peoples in their tribal lands to claim them. Their children were considered legal property, and you could, what was called the friend clause, look this up, you could claim that this Indian child was a friend of yours and literally put them to slave labor for 18 years. Any American citizen could go kidnap, literally walk up to any Indian tribe or person and physically grab them by their head or hair and drag that child away from their mother or father and put them to work on a slave camp. This was in the 1800s. This was commonly done till I'm not sure when, and I don't know when it became illegal. Indigenous peoples were not considered human. There's a whole issue on the definition of what a human is based on American or governments. And you can look this up because it's serious. Subhumans, if subhuman is a classification of humans. Blacks, mulattoes were not considered humans. Even Italians, I believe, Irish, were all in one part of the world at one time considered subhuman. The indigenous children were allowed to be taken and enslaved until they were 18. No indigenous people were allowed to own property or get paid in the 1800s. They were considered an enemy of the state or of the country, and the newspapers would put out headlines pushing for people to go and create as much massacre as possible to these enemies of the state. And it was United States sponsored genocide. And in Oklahoma, for some reason, they've decided to depict indigenous peoples as some type of grateful, honorable status symbol when they committed genocide on those people. The Trail of Tears is not a tomato heirloom strain. It is a trail of death and devastation and genocide when they moved tribal peoples from their tribal lands and they herded them to places in Oklahoma where they renamed them and gave them names like Cherokee and whatever, American names. And to this day in 20 excuse me, I'm looking at the number 9. In 2015, it is still, as you can see, they still use racial depictions as avatars. There's nothing honorable about the state of Oklahoma, and there's no such thing as a Native American. You're either indigenous or you're not. All United States American citizens that are born in America are Native Americans. If you come from another country, you are considered a foreigner. You're not considered an Italian American. You're not considered Afro-American indigenous person of Sudan. You either are an American or you are not. If you classify yourself as an African American, you are a racist. You are using a racist term. If you classify yourself as an Indian, you are a racist. You are using a racist term. So it goes on both sides of the fence, unfortunately. Not only are people victimized, but then they further that victimization by allowing these depictions of so-called honorable statuses, and they also use the same language. And as an example of the African Americans using the term African Americans. In the past 42 years, United States history has changed the name labeling of these people that they considered subhuman until I'm not sure what year, look that up, It could still be on some current federal paperwork, but they're not even considered human. They don't have the same rights. And so for them to, you know, propagate that still is ridiculous, you know. If a person's skin color is how you consider that person to classify them, then you are a racist. And you cannot look at a person and tell that they are from Africa or that they're from America. And if you, and I'll just put the white elephant in the room, look at a person who you might refer to by definition, that person is black, that does not make them an African American. And if you go to Africa, you will see there are all different races of people there. If they were born in Africa, does that make them an African citizen? It seems pretty common that that would make sense. So if your white, freckled-faced redhead kid walks by you, don't you assume that they're an African American? Wouldn't you assume that? Because, you know, there's a good portion of Africa that happens to be white, redheaded, freckle-faced kids. So every white, redheaded, freckle-faced kid, you just automatically must assume is from Africa, correct? Of course not. Of course not. You know why? Because you are a racist. And you look at a person with dark skin and you automatically in your head think there's a black person, there's an African American. Now whether or not these truisms may or may not exist is irrelevant. If you're in the country of Africa and you are talking to your fellow citizen, you are both Africans. If you are in America talking to your fellow citizen, you are both Americans. There's no need for racism to be in that conversation at all, except that as an American, we are dictated by federal law, which means that we actually have to acknowledge race. You cannot fill out government paperwork without putting out racist information that depicts what your nationality is, your race, what country you came from if you're not originally from this country. None of these questions pertain to the paperwork involved. These could be involving car insurance and different irrelevant things that have nothing to do with something that might be relevant, you know, when you're looking at birth records or something. So all you baseball teams and all you sports teams, and different businesses in the state of Oklahoma, anyone that uses depictions of indigenous peoples, you're a racist. And anyone that is of any particular race and propagates what the government has classified them as, you're racist. And, you know, for the record, you have to understand that a person that works at a store or a business or is getting government grants or research or is involved in the public atmosphere, they can't go on and on like I am, because if you're black, you can't go on and on about that on the news. You're a weatherman. You're trying to get paid. You mention one word about this African American black reference and you're going to get fired. So that's why newscasters and public broadcasters and people that do broadcast out to the public and that represent society in general, that's why they propagate these racist terms. Even if they don't believe in them and they are personally the victim of those racist terms, they will still say these things. And I would also say that it's also because they are racist. Closet racist, reverse racism exists. It doesn't really matter if you have some cultural significance to that racism. It's like, oh, the term, I have a black friend, therefore I can say certain words. You know, it's just not true. You either are or you are not. And we are all people. And it's just horrible that people would propagate anything that doesn't make everyone equal and future progressiveness. I think that it's demeaning to classify people in 2015, and I understand that people that come from other countries and when it comes to government paperwork and different things, that they're, obviously things, people have to be classified, but it's really of no relevance. These generalized profiling, or bigotry or racism may have some roots somewhere in, survival tips or politics or in that person's country, or when you're warring, or something. And that's where probably the roots of a lot of racism and stuff comes from. You have two people or two different people that run into each other that don't know each other, so they don't get along, and then they tell their children that that other person is bad. And that is exactly what the federal government and the state of California and the state of Jefferson did all in the 1800s, when they paid hunters and all U.S. citizens $5 to bring Indian head scalps to the county courthouses. And these are not rumors. This is atrocious. And they were murdering those indigenous peoples. Had no rights. It wasn't like you got in a fight or that person did you wrong. This was a claimed war, and those, just like in today in the Middle East, those people, and general speaking, of course, because it wasn't like they went and found an individual person that was an actual criminal. They just generalized a whole race and go, okay, all of those people that look like this are our enemy. You need to, as a good American citizen, defend your country. You need to go kill them. That was a standard commandment in the 1800s. That was an American pastime, right, job. A lot of people got paid well. Soldiers were freelance soldiers, basically. Vigilantism was a common, and it still is pretty much, actually, where I'm at right now in the state of Jefferson. We have no real law enforcement, so people are still home rule, and these people out here are the people that I am talking about. Oklahoma has its own disgusting trail of tears, racist history. It's just so offensive. That's why I've been going on for half an hour about this disgusting license plate I have to look at. And I mean, it gives you this beautiful view of this majestic, indigenous person. It was just not true. That person was beaten in the head with a club, an axe handle, and their children were beaten in the head with axe handles, and their wives were raped and then mutilated and then murdered. These people were sadistic and into sadism. It's not about defending your property or in a war. In a war situation, you hide in the bushes. Even you might shoot somebody, and you can say that's okay because you are in a war and they are going to shoot you back. But the indigenous people, besides maybe a few warring people, were on the run. These were people that were hunter-gatherers. They were gathering some acorn nuts, and a bunch of people decided that property was worth a lot of money because that's where the gold was. And so the gold miners, the gold rush, is what helped extinct the indigenous tribal lands in Northern California in the state of Jefferson, because the miners came out here and they were the law. And again, for the record, yreka, Redding, Shasta, Weaverville, Trinity County, Siskiyou County, McKinleyville, Arcata, Humboldt County. These are all the names, first and last names. Shasta, Trinity, Lewis Clark. These are all the leaders of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, and people like that. They're nobody. That's like one or two people out in hillbilly land, shooting, at some target or something. They're worthless. The real racisms and the real powerful people are our American government. They're the ones that issued out declarations of war against the indigenous people. We're talking about women and children. And of course any man's going to be, hey, you just shot somebody. Okay, well, that's just like your neighbor across the street. There he is. There's one person. Okay, so there's another, so he can call 5 or 10 other people. Nobody in their neighborhood can just gather up arms, okay, which it's called a militia, but you have to liken it back to a historical time when these people, the indigenous tribe, and just for the record, indigenous peoples aren't like, oh, them Indians over there. Well, the Indians in Oklahoma and the Indians in this neighborhood have never met or heard of each other. Remember, there's no planes or automobiles back then. They had no idea. They're just hunter-gatherers out in the woods. So if there happen to be 500 or up to, say, 2,000 or 3,000 people in that tribe, which I think is a huge tribe, they wouldn't know anything about another tribe anywhere. And if they did, they would be enemies to that tribe. So say on this side of the road, you have tribe A, and on this side of the road, you have tribe B. yes, they're actually going to war with each other. And it's possible, just like all tribal feuds or feuds amongst states and countries, that, you know, some daughters will get involved, some wives will get involved, some children will be birthed, hopefully. By the way, that's the solution. By the way, that is the solution. You have children with the enemy. You integrate the children into the racist agendas or the political agendas that are offensive and disgusting, and you change the views from within. Because you're not going to convince your children that your wife is a bad person and needs to be murdered. You're not going to convince your children that your father is not a human and needs to be murdered and genocided off the planet. You're not going to be able to do that. But what you can do is convince one whole race of people that only have one solid belief, like a religious clan or something, that the other group that is not of your religion or your belief are bad. That you can easily do, and you can easily teach your children to do that. And unfortunately, not only can you do that to your children, but our government can do that. And they do it through state-sponsored newspapers and general media that propagates, again, these offensive, racist agendas. But in the 1850s, it was a job. It was a paid job that the government paid people. They don't say the Indian head nickel has anything to do with this, but in the 1800s, people were paid $5. It was a representative of the genocide of the indigenous people. I mean, they can't hide that. I mean, sure, you could pull 9 points together and say, you know, point A plus point B equals something, you know, 9 degrees of separation. But they paid $5 for a decapitated Indian's head. Now you got to think about that. That's disgusting. Okay. Now, if you were defending your property, your home, or even against a warring peoples or whatever, I don't know, if it was me, and I mean, I guess that's just me, and I'm out there and wherever this battlefield is, we're not talking about somebody jumping through your window necessarily. You know, we're talking about you're going out and defending somewhere on a war ground, you know, maybe hunting them. Actually, these indigenous people were hunted down, but let's just say that in normal battle, you have a place where you go fight, basically. Okay, you shoot somebody, for instance. Do you actually go find the body? I mean, maybe if it's because it's the only